So welcome to this Active Building Centre hosted COP26 Fringe event in association with Stroud District Council. I'm Chris Brierley, the Active Building Centre's Business Development Manager. I'm proud to say I've got a great panel of 4 experts here with me today to discuss the topic of what is the role of the public sector in leading net zero. So we have 4 members of the panel. We have Dr. Jon Furley from the University of Gloucestershire. We have Martin Surl, the former Police and Crime Commissioner for Gloucestershire. We have Doina Cornell, the Labour and Cooperative Leader of Stroud District Council. And we have Max Wilkinson, the Liberal Democrat Climate Change Emergency Cabinet Member at Cheltenham Borough Council. Thank you to my panellists. So then, we've heard a lot over the last couple of days and the last couple of weeks with regards to net zero and the challenges we all face. And I'm sure in Glasgow we'll hear a lot more as the world gathers in the Scottish city. So what is the role of the public sector in leading net zero? I'll start with you first of all, Doina, as your association with this debate. What's your view of how the public sector can lead the net zero?
Thanks, Chris. Right, you really put me on the spot with. Thank you very much. I need to choose my words carefully because I've got our Chief Exec and Director of Place here as well. I'm obviously a very integral part of the project that we're running as a District Council. So I thought this is a huge topic, isn't it? So I thought probably what's best is I give you a bit of a flavour for where we are as a Stroud District Council ourselves and a little bit of the wider context, because you are asking us to talk about the public sector. It's not just local government. And then a little bit about what next steps are and where we're going now. So I mean, just as a District Council ourselves, the path that we've been on is we were the first council in Europe to become carbon neutral back in 2015. So we all know, those of you who live within Stroud District, well, what the character of this place and the environmental expertise that has been in this area for a very long time. And as a local council, we've been able to draw on that. And I think we've also been informed by the fact we're quite an unusual political makeup. We are made up of Labour, Greens and Lib Dems. We've been running the council in that way since 2012, and we work very closely with our Conservative colleagues as well. So there's very much a cross-party consensus on that. I thought I'd give us a few practical examples on our path so far, and having started from that basis of becoming a carbon neutral council, we declared an emergency, a climate emergency in 2018. I think we're the second council in the country to do that after Bristol. And on the back of that, you declare an emergency and then you very much think, well, what happens next? So then the work had to begin to get the sort of solid policy and plans in place in order to actually start to work through the system of how you deal with an emergency. So what we did was we created a very detailed strategy which was adopted back last year. We're able to do that even in the midst of the pandemic, and sitting below that is a very detailed action plan. If you want to, I can't go into all the details now because it's a huge document and has a huge amount of detail, but I think that's the framework which has been created for us as a council. And right at the heart of that, when we talk about public sector's role in getting to net zero, was a recognition that as a council we're only responsible for a tiny amount of the emissions in the district, and also we are only able to do a certain amount, but we can be a really powerful force as an enabler for whoever else is within our area, whether that's public, private sector, community groups as well. So that is quite a key recognition for us. And just to give you an example of sort of how the sort of practical measures will fall out of that strategy, just in the last month or so, we've adopted a plan to decarbonise our 5,000 council homes to get them all to the level of EPC C, so that there's a huge amount of data and work that's been done. So I think what's interesting about local councils is that we very much are practical organisations, and we take the ideas and we want to turn them into practical projects. So that's an example of how we've got 5,000 council homes, but we need to do the work. We've done a huge amount of data and crunched the information to understand what would be required, and we had various scenarios of different costs. We came up with sort of the middle road in Wales, what we could afford, and that's going to be an investment of £180 million over 30 years. So that's quite a significant investment. On top of that, we're doing about £3 million investment in each year around sort of, building up in insulation and making those homes fit to live in. So that's one practical example of something. Another one is we're just about Ebley Mill, you may be familiar with, as a council building right next to the river. We're going to have a water source heat pump that should go online quite soon, within the next month or so. That's an example of how we can be an example to the community, and we're actually working with a local company. So also embedded in all the work that we do is around how do we encourage the local economy, how do we support local enterprise so that we can sort of be that active part of our community. And another thing, there's been a lot of talk about planning and building standards over this during today, and we've got our process of reviewing and adopting a new local plan, and embedded in there are some really high standards around zero carbon and how we can get that into the system. It's going further than the national policies currently are. We're taking a bit of a risk because we don't know if we're going to be allowed to proceed in that way, but that's the way local councils are going. So those are just a few examples of some of the things we're doing, and there's a lot more. Talking about the public sector, we're working with one public estate, so we've now got some funding from government to work with health, police and all the other public sector within the Stroud district, how we can build some extra capacity around that whole decarbonisation agenda. And skills has been talked a lot today. How do we build those skills, the capacity into the local economy? So just as I've said around the fact that we can't do it on our own, how do we create that sort of that partnership is really important. And I think the other really important thing that a council like ourselves and the public sector bring to the table, which probably others can't, is that we're very much about place, and we will look at the communities that we represent and we will create solutions that very much focus on them, and we look at things very much in a holistic fashion as well. I think today the theme has very much been around construction and the built environment, and that's a key plank of our strategy, but we're also looking at the ecological emergency and how we can enhance biodiversity. We're looking at social justice as well, another key aspect of our strategy, because it can't just be about sort of what people can do who can afford to do it. It's also how do we bring up those people, for example, who might be suffering from fuel poverty, which is something that's very topical at the moment. So how do we look at it in the round? So that's sort of where we are as a district council. Very briefly, because I'm sure I'm running out of time to speak about all of this, the wider context is across the country, every level of local government are engaging with this, and every, whatever sort of level of commitment they've made, every council, regardless of their political colour, many of them have declared climate emergencies, and many of them have got really well developed plans and putting really practical projects in place. So there is collectively across the entire country, and we cover every single place, street by street, we are in every community, there is a political willingness to do the practical work that is needed to get us to those absolutely essential goals, which is to get to the reduction of our carbon emissions. And as I said, we have to see that now in partnership with the ecological emergency as well. We cannot look at those two things separately. That's also extremely important. So that is the context that you've got. You've got that incredible will across, and I speak to council leaders of all political colours across the country, and that is something that we very much share. And that's really significant, because that goes on to my final point that I'll make, which I've written I've got two big buts down here. So the but, what are the difficulties, what are the barriers? And I think that's one of the things that you wanted to address, which we may also talk about a little bit in the debate. Obviously, we've just had the government has published its zero carbon strategy this week, which is really significant. I took some time to go through it. It's about a 300-page document. I think I got to about page 200 before I found a sort of reference to local government and what our role might be in this absolutely crucial challenge. And so I think it's great the strategy's there. I don't want to be too political and knock what the government's trying to do. And superficially, it looks fantastic. There's some great headlines that come out of it. When you actually start to drill down into the details of it, I'm quite concerned about how it's going to enable the delivery of what actually needs to be done. And let's face it, we declared a climate emergency. Time is running out for us to get on and make those significant steps. So I think what we need to see is some really significant practical stuff to sit below that strategy. One example, obviously, it's been highlighted, is around the grants for green homes. For green homes, that was the one that was abandoned, wasn't it, at the end of last year? I mean the one around the air source heat pumps. So that would be around, only a tiny percentage of homes would be eligible for that grant, but what's not been very clear so far is how are those air source heat pumps going to be installed? Who is going to do the maintenance? We've got, as a council, we've got the local expertise. I think it's around 8 or 9 years where we've started to install air source heat pumps in our own buildings, and we're aware of all the challenges that involves. So are those grants going to be administered by local authorities? Are they going to be administered by, as was done with the Green Homes grant, where we saw that scheme didn't really work out, where it was by an outsourced company that did it. So I think what we need to see is some practical measures, and I'm a little bit concerned that the detail isn't there. There's some big figures that have been put into that strategy which sound really great, but actually when you drill down into those millions or billions and you divide it by every part of the country, you realise that's not a great deal for every single place that will require that finance. And my other two things, and I will finish in a minute, Chris, is it's very much a grant-based system. So what it is, government is saying we're allocating this amount of money, which sounds great, so it's a nice big pocket of money, but every council will have to, or public sector body will have to bid for that money. So you're on the basis that instead of just saying, right, this is the need, let's allocate it according to your need, everyone has got to put the bids in. So if you're great, if you've got a good team, we're quite successful as a council as getting those grants in, but it means you need to do that. So it may mean if you get the grant, then the other place doesn't get it. And similarly, I mean, I know this is a real significant thing for the education sector. I think this college where we're based today has suffered from the fact of that competition-based, my microphone's gone then, competition-based aspect of finance where you'll end up competing against each other. So this element of competition, I think, is quite difficult. And the final thing, something I've been talking about for a long time, is if you expect local government to do a lot of the practical work as the actual actors and also the enablers in the system, we have no statutory duty to do any of that. Everything that we do currently around carbon reduction is just off our own bat. There's no funding that comes with that, and there's no powers, and there's actually a specific line in the zero carbon strategy which says we are not going to put any statutory powers in for government. And there's also a bit of a line saying basically you're going to have to finance this all from what you've already got. And we're expecting, because of the impact of COVID, that the funding will be going down for local government. So you can see I'm nervous about some of this stuff. I think the aspirations are there. The incredible practical expertise is within the public sector. I've talked mostly about local government, but it's certainly within the health sector as well, and other aspects of the public sector. But are we really being given the tools that we need to do the work, which is absolutely essential? I'll stop there.
Wow, I think she's done the debate for us. Questions 2 and 3 there. So, yeah, a round of applause to Doina there. Questions 2 and 3 about barriers and what you're going to do, so we'll come on to that. I think one of the things you said then, I'll pick up and throw this to Martin Surl, the former PCC, is, you said about all these climate change emergencies being declared and, why it's been accepted that needs to be done. Martin, as a PCC for Gloucestershire, you made it an agenda issue, not only locally but nationally, the first to do it. Why did you do it and what did you do?
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think the first thing that the public sector has got to do is show leadership. You show it, I know, but it's not across the board. You've got to show leadership and you've got to deliver, not just say the words. I could see through climate change, all these issues, green issues, call it greenwashing. A lot of it to me seemed symbolic. We'll have one of these, we'll do one of those and see how it goes. But to me, and I spoke to a huge number of people about what their concerns were. And my area was policing, reducing crime if I could. So I had to set priorities. And I set 6 priorities for policing. 5 were directly related to reducing crime, reoffended, all these issues. But number 6 was what I called a green and pleasant county. You may have called it a climate emergency, because the environment in which we work and live is absolutely crucial to a public sector and to the people that we serve. So it seemed absolutely right that a police service, a council, NHS, anything in the public sector, if they can't see now we have a climate emergency, it would be wrong not to make that a priority. And it actually needs to sit alongside their core business. Now, many people disagree and say, well, we're here to do policing, we're not here to do climate change. Well, one goes with the other because we're all part of the same community. And there is a lot of resource within all these organisations. I don't expect police officers to actually go and deliver the climate emergency, but the structures that sit behind them, and they are vast, and the same within the health service, they need to be having that as a priority to make sure that public service is leading by example, is not just being symbolic. And that's what we tried to do with what we called the Green and Pleasant County Initiative, Priority for Policing. It had huge public support. We'll go on to electric vehicles just briefly, is that the public don't like to see diesel police cars or council vans or whatever it is pumping out diesel in front of their children's school. They don't like it. They love the innovation to see a public sector actually doing something that they said they would do. And I know the electric cars are a talking point which brings engagement straight away with the public. But you can't do it just symbolically. And when I met Rob Llewellyn on Fully Charged, there are dozens of examples of organisations who will have one electric car and make a big fuss about it. I think I saw a fire engine had a couple of solar panels on its roof. Well, it wouldn't even light a light bulb, let alone anything else. Very symbolic. I'm not knocking the fire service. That's for another day. Tonight, actually. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. So it's important. But what we did, we've got to be at the cutting edge. The public sector must be at the cutting edge of technology and climate change. I don't think it should be at the bleeding edge. That's really for industry. We've heard so much about what industry can do, what science can do. But when the technology comes online, we should be at the cutting edge, because we say we represent the public, we say we serve the public, and we say we want to show leadership. So as soon as these technologies come on board, we should be at the forefront, adopting them, testing them. A, because we have the money to do it. It's important to do that, so we can try that, and to demonstrate to the public who perhaps don't have the money to do it, just how it can be done. So we began our journey on electric vehicles in Gloucestershire Constabulary with one, I think, first or second generation Nissan Leaf. My office drove it. It was a challenge to see if we could get back at night. We took all the flack, all the scepticism about if you got a long enough lead, when it was run out, all these things. But we were just testing that technology. Actually, we began with something else. It was one that did about 30 miles. Forget it, great car. But the moment I was on London Underground, I read about the new Nissan Leaf. This one would do over 100 to 200, I think 200 miles. So we had got to get into that straight away. So we made it a priority that we would have those in the constabulary. Now, saying it's one thing, putting the infrastructure in place is absolutely crucial, because you can't be seen to fail on this. It's not. So the infrastructure is crucial. I wish we could have shared it with other public sector organisations. Wider afield, that wasn't their fault. That's just where we were at that particular time. And we set a target to the constabulary, said 20% of your vehicles need to be electric within 4 years, or 3 years, whatever it was. That was a big change for them. There is this myth that police cars drive around all the time. They spend most of their time parked up. We put the telematics in to see where they drove, when they drove, and we put an infrastructure in place that meant we could actually do that. And then we set a target for 40%. So at the moment we have 100 vehicles, roughly, but maybe slightly less, which are fully electric. Not one has ever run out. No one's ever had range anxiety. It makes them drive slower. We can see what they're doing because they're into getting the maximum out of it. So that's the first thing you do. The second thing you have to do is to keep pushing the envelope, because the technology has advanced no end. You don't put them on the motorway yet because they haven't got they need to run 24/7. But probably most police forces could tomorrow run on 20%, 40% electric vehicles. But they're not doing it for some reason. Why not? I don't know. There is no excuse for it. That's why I think it should be mandated. Not that you should have a certain percentage of vehicles, but every public sector, it should be required in all your decision making, you take the impact of climate change into account and you demonstrate that. Just as the way you would around equalities, you have to demonstrate that. One of the most powerful pieces of legislation in policing was 1998, the Crime and Disorder Act, which said all public sector, in all your decision making must take into account the impact that will have on crime and disorder, public safety. It changed the game. And why they won't do that, maybe they will for climate change, said, the health service, MOD, huge. In all your decision making, you must say why it contributes towards net zero. Simple to do, so when you're doing buildings and so on. It's been hugely successful. It actually saves money. I'm not sure if the 40% target left the day I left the building in May. I hope not. And if it has not, if it's still on there for 40%, I'll be having things to say about it. But the downside is Gloucestershire has 20% of their vehicles are electric, about 100 of them, mainly black Nissan Leafs. It seems you can only get them in black when we bought them, a bit like Model T Ford. But we couldn't charge our cars. You went to Wiltshire or to Bristol or to Manchester. It was hopeless. And all behind barriers because they're all secure buildings. So just before I left, I took the lead nationally for trying to make the police force more carbon neutral. We had all that, and it was overwhelmingly supported. The unfortunate thing is I didn't win the last election, so I don't do it anymore. But that's really, by the way, I have more time on my hands now. But it's essential. It's all joined up. What Stroud does is brilliant, so why can't the others do it? Just take the very best of it and make it compatible. So much more I could say, Chris, but I'll leave it there.
We'll come back to you. I think you've answered question 3, so we're going through the questions.
That's okay.
Dr. Jon Furley is the Sustainability Operations Manager and Carbon Lead at the University of Gloucestershire. So then, John, the question was, what is the public sector's role in leading net zero? University of Gloucestershire is doing some of that, isn't it? Tell us a bit more.
Yes. So I suppose I was going to start with the one of, first of all, just why are we doing it, I suppose. So my answer to that really simply is because it's necessary and I think we have a duty to be doing it. But then it's supported by the fact that our students want to see it, our staff want to see it, and it's definitely the right thing to do. We are currently the #1 most sustainable university in the UK in the People and Planet League. We got 2 years out of that due to the pandemic because they didn't run it last year, so we got an extra year free. But we do take that seriously, and we've not just been on this journey for 1 year, we've been on it for like 15 years, and we've done a lot before without calling it what we're doing for net zero. Last week we launched our net zero policy, so we're aiming to be net zero by 2030, and that's not going to be simple or easy. And I think that question around how are we doing it, that's where the real trick will be. And for us, everyone's talking great things today, and it's focused on kind of the built environment in a way. But for us as an organisation, we know that 20% of our carbon emissions come from our use of electricity and gas. About 40% come from what we procure, and the other 40% comes from our student and staff commute. So there's stuff we can spend money on and make the change happen, and then there's stuff that we can influence to make the change happen, I suppose. And one of the important things to us is that we've got an estate that consists of currently 4 campuses plus the city centre Debenhams building in Gloucester that we're going to redevelop, so it'll be 5 campuses. And we know from some funding we got from the government through Salix that to replace 7 of our gas boilers costs about £1.5 million, and we've got about 80 gas boilers left after that 7 are done. So to do the rest, about £15 million. So that's in anybody's purse is a lot of money. And that only deals with actually 10% of our emissions. So we've got kind of what can we do physically, then what we can do with engagement. And that's where, I suppose, for us as an organisation, the trick is, because we can educate the people that are coming to us for degrees and education, and we embed sustainability in all of that. And Ali was talking earlier about the digital space and how we embed sustainability in that, and it's in all our courses in a way, and that's an important part of what we can contribute, I suppose, to the big word public sector in a way, because I always end up saying young people, but most of our students are younger than me, so I'm in my 50s. There might be some that are my age, which is great, but we're putting people out there that have more education hopefully when they start, and they're going to get that education in sustainability, and that will include net zero, and they can then go and be those kind of members of the public asking politicians for change and for what they want, but also members of companies and making businesses doing the right thing. So we've got the part where we can kind of almost make a product that helps that net zero change. We've got the part where we can maybe spend some money or do some internal influencing to make people turn light bulbs off. And then we've got the part as well where we can work with, everybody in this room presumably works in some way for an organisation. In some way or another, you're probably providing some sort of service we use, and we'll be looking to come to yourselves to do your bit, I suppose, around reducing your carbon emissions as well. Because actually, you've talked it, we've all talked it, it's actually a big picture, and it's about kind of everyone doing their bit, and that's where the trick will be for us, I think.
So finally then, Max, come to you at the end of this one.
Thanks, Chris.
Public sector role in leading it. Well, in Cheltenham you've got a cabinet member for climate change. What does that involve, and what's your thought on that question?
Well, it's always fun going last, isn't it, when all of the good points have already been made. So I would like to wholeheartedly endorse what Doina said about the role of councils, and obviously Martin and John too, and Martin's role in the police was really important, and what he achieved I think we would like to think is going to be taken forward with our new commissioner. The way I look at this is it's in 3 main areas. It's the things that we can directly do and directly influence, then there's the things that we can sort of indirectly influence, and then there's the things that aren't within our control. And in the first area, you've got things like the council's estate and our council houses, and I'm pleased to say that Cheltenham Borough Council, since declaring the climate emergency and putting me in the role as the first ever cabinet member for climate emergency in Cheltenham, we're bringing forward our first carbon neutral council homes, which is a really important and positive step. We are installing some really innovative smart metering technology all across our council buildings. So when we've got big old drafty heritage buildings like the Pittville Pump Room and the Town Hall and the municipal offices, clearly there's a massive drain on our energy there, and we need to be making sure that we are minimising the amount of energy spend. Then there are some things that we can sort of put in place where it's policies that we can put in place to influence what's going on elsewhere. And that's in terms of our planning policies and our licensing policies. So we're going to be putting in place a supplementary planning document for environment and ecology, which is going to be really important. Doina mentioned a really interesting point there about how Stroud is going to be putting net zero targets in its local plan. What we experienced in Cheltenham when we attempted that before was that a lot of our policies were struck out because they were judged by planning inspectors as in advance of government policy, and that is a key challenge because actually the ambition at local levels is currently far in advance of that exists at the national level, unfortunately. So we find ourselves having to push quite hard at the local level. Our supplementary planning document will set really stringent targets, and it will be a really important nudge for developers who wish to come to Cheltenham and build things or apply for planning permission to do other stuff. And what we will do is use that as a nudge, basically. You'll get a better hearing from Cheltenham, and you're more likely to get through our planning committee if you're doing the right thing by Cheltenham's environment and the rest of the world too, and that's a really important principle. It's a way in which we can show leadership. And the third thing is the bit that we can't do, because I don't think anyone wants the man from the local council or the woman from the local council strolling into their house, switching off the lights, telling them they can't start their car in the morning. These things, this is just not a politically tenable position for councils to take. So we need to help lead that debate. We need to show people that we can play a role as the public sector at the local level in bringing people together and building a consensus. In Cheltenham, we're doing that in two main ways. We're launching community grants, where if you are a local organisation, maybe you're a charity or you're a school or you're a parish council, you can bid for some funding from a pot, which will mean that you can unlock some investment in your local community building, or you can bid for a nice little biodiversity scheme in your preschool garden, or maybe you can generate some renewable electricity on your site. And these things are really important because that is a way in which where we can't directly influence things, we can help others. And then the final thing that we're doing, which is going to be really important and could be something that's very significant and is a model that can be taken to other areas, is we're launching as what we're calling the Cheltenham Zero Partnership. Because we know that we can't tell businesses to do things, we know that we can't just tell people what to do, we know also that there is going to be a huge amount of conflict in this. And we need to find a way to reduce that conflict and build consensus. So the Cheltenham Zero Partnership is going to bring together businesses, the public sector and community groups to share knowledge and to bring forward work streams so organisations and communities can work together in a consensus-based way on projects that will help Cheltenham reach net zero. And all of those things are going to be really important in our approach.
So then, Max, following on from that, what do you think the government could do to kind of help and support the public sector in driving the net zero? Sorry, I've gone first here this time.
Don't worry.
I don't can.
Yep.
So,
leave it on the floor. It's long enough.
Need your break. Yeah. The number one thing the government could do is give us some certainty. Doina mentioned the fact that all of these pots of funding that are available at government level, they're all competitive funds. So while local government and most of the public sector has been under huge pressure, and actually councils now get £0 per year back from the government. When we're in that kind of situation and we're told, here is a pot of money from government level, several £100 billion, which sounds like an absolutely huge number to the man or woman on the street, right? Or the person on the street. And then we're told, what you've got to do is do your feasibility study and then put together a very detailed bid to access some of this money. And you might get it, but you might not. Now, that isn't a really encouraging way to inspire local governments to do its bit. And of course, we all want to do our bit. The public sector wants to do its bit, but what we need is certainty. Because if we're putting resources into quite complex bids, and we're making the best that we possibly can of a really difficult situation, but we have no guarantee of anything coming back. It reduces confidence in the system, I think, and it's a real disincentive, albeit councils like Stroud and Cheltenham are blazing a trail. We're working together on bids for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, for example, which we put a bid in for this week, which is a really positive bit of news because we need to retrofit lots of council houses. We've got about 4,500 in Cheltenham to do, and there's some interesting heat pump technology as well that's involved in that bid. But what we need is certainty. We need certainty about where our funding is coming from. We need certainty about what we'll get in return for our bids, and we need to know that we can plan to get X amount in year 1, X amount in year 2, X amount in year 3, and then we can really start to make effective long-term plans rather than having to do it in a rather piecemeal way, which I think is a check on those kind of detailed plans and strategies that we're all putting in place.
So Martin, from your perspective, thank you Max, from your perspective as former Police and Crime Commissioner, would it have been good that government and the Home Office told you to make the environment and sustainability a priority? Would that have helped you?
I don't think it would have helped me. I can see in the local government setting it would help. I think it's very clear that the public expect this of their local authorities. Probably the police is different and the Ministry of Defence are different because we're defined sectors. Everybody knows we have to do it. And as I said, within these organisations where we deliver something like policing, like Ministry of Defence, like hospitals, there is more than just doctors, police officers and soldiers. There are huge procurement departments, there are huge building departments, and these are the people who say you are important. Our business, call it a business, is going to be sustainable, it's going to be cost effective, and it's certainly going to be neutral on the climate change, on CO2s. So that's where I think it is. I don't think we need the government to tell us to do that because it is so clear it needs to be done. What it needs is people to show leadership and show by example. It doesn't mean just trying things out. I think the experimental stage is for industry, it is for government, it is for science, and there is so much out there. It takes people in those sectors to look at what is out there, talk to them at events like this and say, well, could that work for me? The building next door we bought for the police as their training centre about 2 years ago. It's now the biggest training centre. And of course, it's like a blank canvas, except we were told by our people, not directly for us, to say it's cheaper and better to build a new one. It'll be more, it'll be better. Don't take an old building. Now that building is going to become an active building. It will take a few years to get that where. It's probably getting near to passive now with the solar panels going on the roof, the type of heat exchange it will have. But it can be done. So I think it shows leadership. I think people need to just treat it as a priority within the MOD to say we are going to contribute and we are going to be a responsible organisation with regards to net zero. Within the police as well, now most of it's all about crime, murders, women against violence against women and girls. That's hugely important. But those organisations, as well as that, we're quite clever. We can do other things. We can make this organisation an example. And we did it in Gloucestershire. Getting the 20% of vehicles actually saved us money. There were so many sceptics, but actually it saved us money. And going to 40% would probably save us money as well. So it can be done. What was shocking, I don't mean shock, horror, but we're just one police force, and no other police force in the country had done this. It's not because I'm brilliant or we're brilliant, but it wasn't joined up. And, we needed to be able to say, across the whole of the Southwest, it's all interchangeable. We don't need to have one on one charging system, another on another system. We need to have good deals for servicing and the like of that. And we got to the stage where call it the back office, it's not the back office, the policing would work on 3 priorities. It would be on vehicles, it would be on estates and social value. And there was overwhelming support for that across the country. What we need now is to make sure we're held to account for it, or what the police service of the future needs to be held to account for that. And it should be something that everybody, you the public, expect of it. And if you've got a highly polluting police force, or a highly polluted Ministry of Defence, or health service, we should be able to have us say it's not good enough. We want more than just short waiting lists and short waiting times. We want you to take care of our society. It's cross-cutting. That's my view. Government would be nice, but if you wait for the government to do things, it doesn't. You might wait an awful long time, and there would be at least 3 different opinions. And this is no disrespect to my colleagues here; they're very, very collegiate, and I know that you work together remarkably well. But there is something with party politics. And I wasn't a party politician where people just like to find fault in each other, and it's not very good when it comes to climate change. where we should all be on the same page.
Thank you, Martin. Picking up on one of Martin's points there, John, for you, is Martin was about uniformity, a certain standard with other forces maybe when it comes to what they're doing. What about the university sector? What could the government do? Is it about setting targets for universities? Would that help? 'Cause you're leading the way in Gloucestershire with this, aren't you?
That is a really good question. I'm going to preface it slightly with I've only worked in the university centre for 18 months, so I don't necessarily know all the answers there. What I do know is that there's an organisation called UUK, which is kind of the university's own body for representing itself, that has just sent its own targets around net zero and around, the different scopes for net zero, but around scope 1 and 2 and having a target for that by 2035, I think, and then scope 3, a sort of longer term target. So in a way, I think the university sector does tend to have an easier way of working together because of the type of people involved, I suppose, and because of the way the system's been set up. So I don't think we necessarily need national targets from the government on that. I think actually the sector's been quite good at policing itself. I think there are a couple of points that you both mentioned that are worth picking up on anyway, which is about that connectedness. I think, again, the universities are connected, but we know we can't do it on our own. So taking our actual example with that 40% of our emissions coming from the commute, we can't individually solve that. We can solve that as a community and as a county, perhaps. And some of the things that Max mentioned already that are already helping us are things like Cheltenham Zero. So it is a voluntary kind of club in a way, isn't it? But it does enable organisations that weren't connected before to start having those important conversations. So it's helped also by the councils taking on some more people that are doing climate change stuff. So there's two new people in the team at Cheltenham Borough Council that through Cheltenham Zero we've already made good connections with and we can work together with. And then it's also enabled us to start talking to places like GCHQ. So they're on the other side of Cheltenham from most of our campuses, but they're in between our main campuses and Oxford's campus. And they have a similar demographic of employees and they have a similar number if you add our students into the equation. And they all want to try and encourage their teams to come to work by bus. So Cheltenham Zero has helped with that as well. I think that's where government and local government can help, is just by helping make those connections. The other thing, and I think it picks up on something that people have said already, is around the funding part of it. And I think something does need to change there. So it's great that the current government has put money into it. There was what was called the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme number 1, which had, I think, £1 billion in it. Then there was scheme number 2, which had 75 million. Literally 2 weeks ago, they launched scheme 3, which has an unknown amount in it, and you won't know if you're successful till January. So that doesn't really help with your planning necessarily. But one part of that process is, again, you're competing with equally viable and equally deserving organisations, and that system is a first come first served one. So basically all it's done is, after the first round where everyone suddenly found out what first come first served meant, it means now when the portal or the website opens, it's basically the fastest typist wins. So you've kind of got to get your grant application in within, so we got ours within 2 hours of it opening, but we don't know how much is in that fund. The last fund, when we didn't know how much was in, I got it in 24 hours after it opened, and it had already exceeded the funding by 200%. So you've got to be really, really quick, and that's not driving the right behaviours. That's just driving, poor applications or very, very, very quick typing, which I'm not good at. So from my point of view, though, really the one is helping make those connections. I think that's the one that doesn't necessarily involve spend. And my view on the spend is really, if grants are given out and funding is given out, ultimately the only place that money comes from, and this was one of the topics earlier, we've all got to be honest, ultimately if it's government funding, the only place it's going to come from is us in the end, because it's either going to be through tax paying or it's going to be through paying more prices for the services we use, because the company we're buying it from is going to be taxed differently as well. I don't see there's another revenue stream for that. I might be not a specialist, I might be wrong. So I think that's kind of where it sits.
Doina, following on from that, and so for you, in terms of what can the government do? Is it just about money for you? I mean, it would be great. You've got 5,000 council homes need retrofitting, 180 million. You said you want the money. Is that what it would help? It would help.
Yeah, it would, and I think you've probably got a common theme going on here. What we want is long-term security around funding and not this bid process. I mean, that just sounds really heartbreaking what you had to go through there. And similarly, so I think what we would need, we've got the local government settlement coming up soon, we should have sort of a clear financial settlement for that sector, sort of that which would be around the carbon reduction sort of targets. And there are some really interesting I'm not an expert either, but I think around what you're mentioning about green finance, there probably are some really interesting ideas around there. It's not about just putting the burden on taxpayers, but it isn't simply around the finance. And I was thinking, we need to reflect on the learning we've had through living through a pandemic. We declared an emergency in 2018, and I was thinking when we decided to do it, well, actually, I have no idea what we're doing. What does an emergency mean? And then a real emergency came, which was COVID. And we all, I mean, I can only speak for our council. I mean, how we stepped up, actually, local government across the board and the public sector generally stepped up into such a challenging time and actually just completely turned things around and worked in a completely different way. And so over the last 18 months, we've actually understood what it means to work and operate within a real emergency. Can we learn from that? Because we're not actually operating as regards responding to the climate in the same way. And I think another thing I was thinking about as you were talking, I was reflecting, you said maybe not about having imposed targets, but we've lived with data for the last 18 months. We've been obsessed with case numbers, haven't we, and deaths and hospitalisations. And so we're very used to that. And I think what we don't really have for a country is we talk about carbon emissions, and some people probably who know will have an idea where they are, but actually, why don't we actually have government should put its resources into actually demonstrating every part of the country, well, what emissions do you have, and how do you then start to bring them down? So we should have that sort of data that we could see, so we can actually, and that would help, I think, with people coming on board to visualise within your town, within your city, within your county, what actually it means and how you would, with an idea we've actually floated around in the Stroud district, how we would contribute to actually starting to bring it down, so they're all actively engaged with that. So I think it's not just about finance. So those are things that the government would have the instruments at its disposal to start to happen. And the other thing I would like to say is around what government needs to take on board. I think, again, that's learning from the COVID pandemic, is that if you recall in the early stages when they thought they'd have to bring in quite severe restrictions, there was a feeling that people wouldn't take it, and actually people took it really well, and the communities that came together and actually tolerated some horrendous restrictions for the greater good was actually far in excess of what people had expected, and many people talked about that as quite a positive outcome. And I think what we all feel as politicians in our communities is people keep talking about the fact, well, people won't want to accept difficulties or changes because of the climate emergency and how we'd have to respond to that. But what I feel is there's a huge appetite out there for the public for us to go further, but government needs to be the one that sets that in place. And when I look at the strategy, it feels to me it's all about, well, only if you really need to, you can sort of choose if you do or not. And so it still isn't quite being brave enough to take that step and say, actually, we do need to do this and we're going to do this. And I think people will come with them, because a bit we haven't talked about very much, but something and I think you mentioned it a bit, as we're conscious that how do we bring the community with us and how do we engage with people? And that's, again, we're looking to do a similar thing, a governance that we've got in place, so that community engagement we've got. It's also got to be diverse. It's got to represent our communities. I think I've been involved in working and campaigning on climate change within this area for 10 plus years now, and it felt sometimes like you're talking to the same sort of people, but I think what we now know is it needs to be representing everyone in the community. We need to reach out to the hard to reach communities as well. So I think there's a few ideas there that hopefully will give people food for thought. It's not just about money, but I have to say money is absolutely crucial, and the sums of money that we need to see, if we're really, really serious about this, are quite eye-watering. But we need to start to grasp that nettle. We really need to get on with it, because we're not going to get any significant change unless we really start to engage with what we need. And there's some really good work, like, for example, the New Economics Foundation have done this thing, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's around housing and sort of, I wish I could remember the title of the thing, but it's around, they've sort of identified the sums that would be needed, and work has been done. The data is there to tell us what we need, so government needs to engage with those sums, I think, because they're actually quite significant, but that's where you're going to get the impact if you really want that to happen.
John, I'm going to follow on with that about the issue of education, because we see in the papers you'll have myths about heat source pumps and hydrogen boilers are the answer, and this is the answer here. And does it come down to education, and a bit of myth busting is needed to educate people that it's not going to be a one size fits all solution. It is a myriad of options, and I think, is it down to education to lead the way on this one?
I could just go yes. I think you're kind of right. I think that it's. I was thinking that earlier about another conversation we were having as well, that actually the audience here is slightly self-selecting. So actually, I'm guessing everybody in the room at least is aware of the issue and cares about it. A lot of people don't, and that's not down to them really being ignorant. It's around the information being out there and the people having capacity to spend the time to actually understand what the problem could mean. And perhaps it's partly about really explaining to people what the UK could be like if climate change does happen. Because there's a lot of sort of stories about there's a lot of doom and gloom, and it could be completely correct. It is avoidable, definitely, and I think you've got to give people that hope. But I think that, you know, if I went, for instance, to my parents and said, you know, I think you should replace your gas boiler with an air source heat pump, their first question would be, don't even know what an air source heat pump is. And do they need to know? Maybe not, but do they need to know why they want to change it? They should do. And I think there's education for everyone. There's education that we deliver as part of the courses in the kind of whole world of the big world of sustainability. But we're only delivering that to, I think we have 8,000 students. So, you know, so every year in effect there's about 2,500 students coming out the end of the pipe. That's not a lot. You know, there's a lot of people to educate, and we need to make it understandable education. So I think that when we're talking about it in the big picture, for all of us at home, do we in the room know what we would need to do for our own household to do our bit to avoid climate change? You can do a show of hands if you like. Does everybody think they know, or do you? So that's that's probably more than I would have guessed. So that's great. So it's obviously more effective than I thought.
I think the answer is significantly increase my income.
I think quite possibly it is, actually, yes.
But doesn't that pick up on the point that actually the public are seemingly more aware now? And we are at a bit of a...
I think we're at a crossroads.
Point. We are,
yeah.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
And don't you feel that as councillors, that the public are there, more or less now? The climate change deniers seem to have gone off the news now, and it's more a case of what we're going to do then.
Yeah.
Rather than it's not happening.
Can I say, I mean, it's so difficult for people. You know, I live in a mixture of rural district of towns, and the bus service isn't good. I know, you know, recently they just stopped the buses going to the local railway station. So I've got people in the town who say, well, I cannot get to the bus station anymore, and, you know, I would love to go. I don't want to drive my car, but I cannot do it. So we just make people's lives too difficult to make them unable to make the changes, and that's where the politicians have to come in. You need to make the bus services run. You've got to make train travel. I mean, it costs like, you know, I don't £20 to fly to Glasgow, but probably £100 plus to go on the train. So, you know, we're doing everything we can to make people help them make the choices, and I think that's where we need to be making those decisions, because people want to do it, but it's very hard for them to. We're not enabling them to help them. They want to, but they can't, because it's just impossible.
I think there's a point here about what people see and do in their day-to-day lives, and how that actually translates to what we're asking them to do. And while there's more people who have moved along the bell curve and now understand and want to get involved in things, and it's not just the same dozen or so people in Cheltenham that I see going to every single meeting, there's a bigger group, including some of the people in the room today. The understanding of what people might need to do and how we communicate that to people as politicians is really interesting. And what are the touch points that can actually get people to change their behaviours, because large-scale behaviour change is needed. You mentioned buses and transport there, and I think that's a really instructive example. The often quoted statistic in Cheltenham is that 70% of our car journeys are below 2 kilometres, which for a healthy person is a very walkable distance, or a cyclable distance if we had a cycle network in Cheltenham. And we've put forward the Connecting Cheltenham report to try to influence others at the Highways Authority to say that this is a thing that we could easily do here. You know, we can have active travel networks. We can have pedestrian-friendly streets. But if at the moment we went to people in Cheltenham and said, get on your bike or walk to work, they'd probably go, well, it's quite an unpleasant experience, and I'm walking through lots of traffic, and there's lots of pollution in the air. So there is a way in which we can, I think, make that discussion a bit more tangible for people, and get to some of those emotional touch points by talking about public health, because everyone cares about the health of their children, everyone cares about their own health. And I think when we're talking about these kind of things, if we're tying it into public health and the public health outcomes that we can get, and the way we can protect the NHS, as we heard at length during the pandemic, by walking or cycling, or just simply dropping our car journeys, or changing to EV or taking the bus instead, that is another way in which we can make a more powerful argument to some of those people who perhaps aren't making that direct link between their actions and negative outcomes for the environment. And I think there is actually, spilling out of that, there are things in which that we can do when we put our policies in place. So, for example, and people don't really like the idea of hypothecated taxes or hypothecated revenues, but for example, when we're making money from our car parks, why can't we then ring-fence some of that money and say, when you park your car here, you're paying £10 a day or 10p an hour more, and we're going to put this into a fund that pays for something positive. It could be trees. That's the easy answer, that everyone likes trees. But it could be something different. It could be public awareness campaigns. It could be something tangible. It could be biodiversity. It could be anything really. It could even be a network of cycle lanes. But I think there are ways in which we can make the case, and ways in which we can put policies in place that make it much more obvious for the regular folks who have not self-selected and turned up to today's debate, as Jon was saying.
I think Max is absolutely right. I personally don't think we're going to scare the public into action, because by the time they actually physically see it, it'll be too late. So I just don't think we will. But a lot of the change is good. I don't think people like pollution, so that's a good reason to perhaps go electric. I don't think people like to see polluted rivers because they want to use them to swim or sail on. I think there's so much the public would like about this, and there is a real sell in it, as industry. That electric cars are good. Probably the way we turned it into police was to get a Tesla, one of the really super fast ones, and give it to the biggest suits in the world. They're brilliant, but the traffic police, the police are cynical. So here, you've got this for a week. We persuaded Tesla to give us for a week. And all of a sudden, these are really good. These are Ferrari fast. They like that. And I can tell you now, we had a phone call from Tesla because Big Brother is out there saying, who the hell's got our Tesla? Because it's just doing 140 miles an hour down the motorway or something like that. It's okay, it's the police, don't worry. But it changed it from a kind of like, the commissioner's a bit quirky. He's got that funny shaped Nestor Leak, which he drives. I didn't pay for it, it's a company one. But those kind of things, it can be fun. So it's really selling to the public. It's good. I want my children to live up, they would have grown up, in a safe environment. I want them to have a clean environment. We all like that, We don't want dirty, filthy factories and polluted rivers and estuaries. So, but I really don't think I may be wrong, that we are going to scare people in to say, we're all going to drown here in 100 years' time, or less, even if it's probably true.
Do we need a public service education campaign then, do we? Former journos, is it a public service, broadcast kind of campaign?
Well, I'm really interested in the message that we give out as people who are involved in the public sector of politics, because I think it needs to be one of hope. Jon mentioned hope earlier on, I think, and that's really important, because you've got to paint the picture of a future that people want to live in, rather than saying you can't have steak, for example, or you can't eat kebab and you can't drive the fast car that you like. So that's really important. Just to pick up on the point about everyone dying of flooding in 100 years' time, right? One of the really important points is that we set targets that are so close that people actually have to do something. Because a point I had written in my general notes here was that the government's target is 2050. Most local councils have set targets for much closer than that. I know that if I'd walked into Cheltenham Borough Council and said, we'll set a target for 2050 of carbon neutrality, they'd have gone, oh, well, that's nice, we'll put a plan in place. And nothing would have happened for a very long time, because everyone knows that by 2050 that most of the councillors on Cheltenham Borough Council will be dead, and most of the officers will have retired, or they will be dead too. I will even be old, and I'm among the younger councillors. I'm only 37, but this is a really important point, right? The message needs to be that it is an emergency and it is urgent, and targets need to be close. And then you say, but when we get to that target, which is quite close, you'll have clean streets, you'll have more trees, you'll have more animals and birds to look at, you'll have a nicer life, your children will have fewer respiratory problems, you'll be healthier, you won't see quite so many people clogging up the NHS because they've got problems with obesity. It's all of these points that I think we need to paint as politicians, just to paint that sort of positive vision of the future, so we can say, actually, this is something that's worth having, and it's not just kind of intangible and doom and gloom and everyone's going to die.
And I think part of that, though, is that storytelling part, because quite often people, even in the workplace as well, and not just in net zero, in everything, when they hit the first barrier or block, quite often people just kind of stop because they don't feel empowered to to raise it as a question or to resolve it or to find a way around it. But telling those stories around, even how you would get the message out of putting 10p on the parking price, how you successfully did that and got around the barrier, but then also how that money is then used to remove a different block or barrier somewhere else. That's probably part of the secret as well, around that touch on the education bit around this is a successful way of just not just going, oh, it's a problem, oh, I've hit a barrier, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm going to stop, but I've hit a barrier, I'll think of something different.
Or sometimes in the public sector, it's, oh, I'm scared of the private sector and I don't want to work with them just in case they might make a quick buck. And we know we don't have the capacity or the resources to actually deliver that service. And sometimes that is the problem in the public sector.
Do we really have to convince people, by saying it's 10p for this? Can't we just get the message out? This is mainstream now. This is what we do. Our council, I'm not knocking you, by the way, this is what we do. We don't say, hey, this is 10p for this, for that. This is probably the most important thing. The public should expect, we say, well, hang on, out of my general taxation, why on earth isn't this mainstreamed? And in so many of the things that I used to get tired of when I was commissioner, so, well, we're on a pilot project. I said, why? Because this has been researched for the last 30 years. Why? If you think it's that good, we don't need another pilot study. Just commit to it or bin it. It was around restorative justice. They said straight away, can we have a pilot project to test restorative justice? That began in the 70s. Either you like it or you don't. And if you're really committed to it, put the money aside and do it. Otherwise, go away. And that's what they did. They did it. and I think the same for climate change and for the environment. You shouldn't, I respect what you do, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but saying that the council should be carbon neutral should be a given, and it should be, why on earth aren't you doing this? Rather than you have to explain it by, it's a surcharge. It's not. It should be a surcharge for doing something stupid. Like if you really want to do that, that's 10p extra. You want to have a particularly wide gas guzzling car, which you park on the pavement. Well, we're going to. You know what I'm talking about. We're going to charge you £1 extra because you're a nuisance. But to do the right thing, it should be mainstreamed. I don't want to be charged extra for doing the right thing.
Can I just say, coming back, because we're talking quite a lot about communications, and I think it's a point that I made very early on when I spoke first, was around, one thing that was sort of strengthened through COVID was around this pride of place where we live, because we couldn't travel anywhere. And I think that's also, going back to what you're saying about where you're going to put the funding, is that people care about where they live, and that is something quite fundamental to them, regardless of where they are. And I think you can use that as a way into discussing some of those things. But I think the other thing we have to bear in mind is public sector. We've got a day job to do, and we need to get that golden thread of climate all the way through. But actually, we've got to empty the bins, and we've got to do all the basic stuff as well as all of this, without the extra funding, without the extra powers. So we're already doing a huge amount. We've got to add all this on top and somehow incorporate it into a whole picture that we're delivering. So I think that's really important. But I think we also have to bear in mind that, particularly going into this autumn and winter, there are many people out there who are just struggling to even go and pay for the food that they need to eat. They're making that choice between eating and heating. So for many people, they're just dealing with the basics. So I think I said about social justice has got to be a part of that as well. We've got to recognise that for people at the moment, many of them, they're living in extremely challenging times, and some of this may feel very remote from their own lives. So again, our job is to communicate that actually is relevant, and what we should be doing is taking people at the bottom, and through the carbon emissions, like about retrofitting council homes, we just take them out. I mean, my aspiration would be that if people below a certain income do not pay energy bills, that should be free, like education and the health service. I think, why should people have to pay for energy? There's enough renewable energy out there, and that isn't even an aspiration we seem to be aiming for at the moment. So I think we need to look at it from that angle as well. I think the barriers that we talked about at the beginning, that's one element of it. How do we make people feel like this is relevant in their lives? Because as you said, climate change feels very remote, but actually they are themselves can be impacted. And probably the people at the bottom will be the most severely impacted, unfortunately.
Quick yes and no questions before we wrap up. So are we saying the public sector has an important role to play? Yes.
Absolutely,
yep.
yes.
It's an easy one. That was an easy
essential.
one. Essential.
Yeah.
The next one, I suppose, is, in terms of public awareness campaign, do we need a national public awareness campaign that is telling people and informing people?
I would like to say yes, with the kicker, that it has to be tying it into something else that will gather up those people who perhaps won't necessarily respond to a doom and gloom climate change message. I actually really like the radical idea that Doina's just put forward, and no one below certain income thresholds pays energy bills is a really saleable policy, and I don't know why anyone in any political party or independent for that matter wouldn't have subscribed to that.
I'd say no to a national thing. It should be local to people where they live and done by people that they know in their community. That's the way it would resonate with people. A remote Westminster campaign isn't going to cut the ice, I think.
No, we don't want Boris Johnson in front of it.
No, exactly.
Martin and John?
I don't care who funds it, but well, I do. But I think it's for industry. I think it's for central government, local government, for everybody to have not just a campaign to scare people, but some of these technologies are just really good. If there wasn't a climate change in emergency, they're still good technologies, most of them. So I think we should be promoting the benefits of these new technologies.
John, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, good.
Well done.
Right then, final wrap-up question for you. You each have 30 seconds, I'd say, with Boris Johnson in the room. What do you want him to do from COP? John, 30 seconds with him. What do you tell him?
Deliver a firm commitment to prevent climate change.
Thank you. Martin?
Tell the truth.
Thank you.
Push back against the fossil fuel industries that are lobbying hard to get us to ratchet back on our ambitions.
Max?
I agree with all those three things, and I would also say just give local areas the powers and the funding that they need to make a difference in their communities, in line with all of the climate emergency declarations that we've made.
My thanks to Dr. Jon Furley, Sustainability Operations Manager at the University of Gloucestershire, Martin Surl, former Police and Crime Commissioner for Gloucestershire, Doina Cornell, the Labour and Cooperative Leader of Stroud District Council, Max Wilkinson, the Climate Change Cabinet Member for Cheltenham Borough Council. You've been watching a Active Building Centre hosted event in association with Stroud District Council. Thank you.